Good morning from Anagalactic. It is morning here on Wednesday, July 8th. We're approaching midsummer. And now we're going to the ultimate context to get all the answers that we actually want. This may not match your list. Of course, each one of us is a completely unique individual. Obviously, we have a lot in common. That's why we do science. That's why we're able to communicate. This is the one and only thing that humans do well together outside of the strict humanity that we comprise. So whenever there's a truce or even a ceasefire, the two sides will come together because their goddamned officers are not looking, that is the higher-ups, and they'll sit down and play cards, they'll have a good time, they'll drink, and then, oh dear, the truce is over, they go back to their trenches and start shooting at each other. So we do get along extremely well, except with governments. Governments are the curse of heaven on earth. You may say, hey, you're impugning God. No, I'm not. He's going to win. And that's exactly how we're going to end up in this brief series to answer my listener's question, which is actually my question, and it's everybody's question. This is universal. If science isn't universal, it's shit. And it also has to get solutions, not theories, not guesses, not we just don't know. You have to get the answers. Now, what are your questions? In this synthesis series, which I've been in indefinitely because it's on a spectrum, this has been an unfolding process for me. This has been an unfolding process for science and for humanity. Now we're going to get the solutions. Now, you'll see at the top of this list here, I have imaginary space. That's actually the heading, followed by some very, very difficult terms, infinity, and then indented space, comma, time, energy, cyclicism, and then you'll see there's some more to follow. Imaginary space is a complete theoretical concept. What does imaginary mean? That's what we're going to be talking about because that's what I discovered is exactly what it means physically. This is physical. This is physics. We're not dealing with mathematics. We're not dealing with theory. We're not dealing with the government. We're not dealing with models or lies. We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with what humans actually need out of science. Okay, so this is physics. Science is a lot of things. Well, you're going to get into most of it today. Imaginary. Imaginary what? Imaginary is a qualifier. It's an adjective. So you have to have a word after it. Imaginary what? So it's imaginary space. Space is the most difficult to define concept. I have to put that in context. Historically, there has never been a definition of space until Albert Einstein. He invented a geometric concept called space-time, and you can see that that's on our third line down here. The application of the abstract concept of imaginary space, isn't space already imaginary? No. Imaginary space refers to the concept of physical space. Is there such a thing as space? But how do you know? It's because light travels through it, which is energy. So it's the medium of free-form energy. Light does take on form, and that goes to the electron, and in fact, through quantization, one can come up with a Newtonian concept of a corpuscle of light, which today is called a particle, which has a name which Albert Einstein gave it, the photon. The photon, that's a Greek word, but it means a particle of light. Is there such a thing? I will prove to you that there is. But it's the first time that that's ever been proved, because you know the particle-wave duality, which is a paradox. Under the advanced topic of religion, which is a genuine topic of science, whether you think so or not, yes it is. Religion, underneath and indented, I have paradoxicality. That is actually a logical key. You have to be able to know how to solve a paradox. I discovered that. I discovered how to solve a paradox in physics. the key to understanding a lot of the current paradoxes. It takes a lot more. Obviously, this is the most difficult set of problems, by definition, that humanity has ever faced. In physics, remember, we're talking about the universe. We're going to also get to consciousness, which I've also penetrated to the extent that for the first time, we do now have a scientific, that is a physical, rational definition of consciousness. I discovered that. At the very top of the list, we have imaginary space. Let's begin there. Space is not imaginary because it's the medium of energy, because light transits through empty space. We say empty because when we look through space, we don't see anything. That's because light penetrates space without distorting space. So it has no effect on space. So space is actually ether. We don't need to go into that. Ether has always been the subject of intense confusion, and it's taught that way in school, at least to me, but I happen to know from reading a lot of textbooks that ether is simply one way of saying that science doesn't know what the hell it's talking about. But ether has to be real. It's space. It's a medium. Is it a substance? You can't say that. It has no material presence. It's the opposite of material. Energy is not the opposite of material, it's the conjugate of matter. We're getting there, but I want you to know that this is a synthesis sequence at an extraordinarily high level. This covers everything. From the basis of mathematics, which I have completely reformulated, we were not taught mathematics correctly. That's simply a fact. I discovered that. And we have a new geometry, which is the replacement for Euclidean geometry. It is technically called non-Euclidean geometry, but that's misleading because science is so confused that it already has a definition of non-Euclidean geometry that is non-Euclidean. And that would be Lobachevsky space and Bolyai space. And this is hyperbolic space. This is the space that Einstein used to compose spacetime, which cannot be understood because the universe is not shaped hyperbolically. It's shaped spherically. It's shaped spherically. I discovered that. But that's not a new discovery. It's simply a confirmation of that which physicists have never understood. Einstein didn't understand it. Nobody's understood spherical space. But everything in the universe that we see, beginning at the moon, the earth, and the sun, and the planets, are all perfect spheres. They're all perfect spheres because of the nature of gravity. And gravity is the bugaboo. Gravity is what has everyone by the you-know-whats. Because gravity does not conform to the model of electromagnetism. If anybody could solve that, which of course I have, then they would have solved the Einstein field, whatever you want to call it, theory. Is just no way to unify gravity with the other forces. Is it a force? That's hotly contested. It's about divided down the middle whether gravity is a force. It is. But the model of what is a force is still Newtonian. Because our mathematics and geometry is still linear. That's ridiculous. We haven't evolved. Everything in the universe is curvature. Everything is curved. Is space-time curved? We'll get to that. The actual answer is no, because there's no such thing as space-time. Although there is. And that's superposition, the discovery of a new form of logic. Actually, the oldest form of logic, which incorporates linear logic, which is on, off, yes, no, true, false. But the universe doesn't do that. Because we don't see right. And that's natural. That should have been expected. But scientists now are filled with satanic pride. I'm sorry to say satanic, but that's actually a scientific word that must be adopted. You will come to know Satan intimately. Is it a being? Yes, but that doesn't matter in science. It's a principle that is explanatory. Governments are satanic. Now that may give you a fanny itch. It means that you've been brainwashed and you don't know what the f*** is happening to you. So when someone says God, or worse, someone says Satan, you get a fanny itch. You start to get emotionally embroiled. This affects a man at all levels. Most men never complete their development. It's sad, because all of us have a perfect opportunity to become men. I know it's on a spectrum. I know we begin as infants. I know that we're programmed by our parents and our school and our society, and of course the church. Whatever it is, you're brainwashed. And then you have to grow out of it. A man is someone who has developed his mind so he can actually face reality rationally. Have you done that? Very few men do. You're going to do it today. That's why I'm here. I'm a pastor. Well, not today, I'm not. All right. Imaginary space. So what is meant by that? Imaginarity is just the strangest, most paradoxical concept, which is really why we use it. Can you think of something that's imaginary? Can you? Because if you can, it's no longer imaginary, because you're imagining it. So what is imaginary space? It's the aspect of space that we cannot imagine. Well, what's that? Well, we don't know. So it's intimately, I know this is baffling, but now you're on the same page with all of your psychotic physicists. This is what they face every day, and they've never faced it because they've never grown up. Partially because the U.S. government funds them so they don't have to grow up. And that's really the source of a lot of problems on Earth. Money. Money will derail you every single time. Can you live without money? Not in this world you can't. So even though I hate money, I've had to deal with it all my life, so have you. Are we embroiled? We're fucked! There's no way out! I'll show you the way out. Of course there is. Of course there is. You know why? Because whenever you have a problem like that and you say something rashly, such as I just said, there's no way out, you know how you know there's no way out? Because you're in a subspace. And in the superspace, there's automatically a way out. You know why? Because you said there's no way out, which means you can imagine a way out, but you can't find it. That's imaginarity. It's what you know must exist, but you just can't see it. But you know it's there. You know it's there, but you can't see it. See is a most abstract term here. Not exactly to do with vision, but with perception, which goes to apperception, because a human is layered. I know I'm throwing out a lot of information. I hope you're absorbing this, because I don't do things randomly now. This is a guided synthetic sequence, so pay attention to every word that I say, because it's all going to make sense at the end. That's the nature of a synthetic sequence. All the difficulties come right at the outset. That's why I began with imaginarity. That's the problem to be solved. What is it? The question that my astute listener asked, which is the inevitable question and always puts a scientist on the rack, what's the application? In other words, what's the take-home? What's the payoff? Why would I want to know what you're going to say about imaginarity? That's what I'm going to address, to answer that question. That's the question everybody wants answered. Why do we want to know about whatever we're finding out, like the cosmos? Why do we want to know about it? Now, innately, we're blueprinted to be curious. So it is a heavenly drive. We'll get to heaven in a moment. Don't forget that you exist in a superspace. You didn't just appear on a continuum. You're absolutely out of nowhere. You don't know where you are by definition. You don't know who you are. You have no idea what's going on. But you can tell after a certain age, and it's actually quite early, you realize very quickly in this life cycle that you have some questions that must be answered. You will have to answer them or you will lose the game, whatever that means. And you will lose the game eventually with death, the cessation of your organism. You're a cellular organism locked on the surface of this speck in an infinite universe. But this planet, this ecology, is so constructed as to make you aware that you can win this game. Or you wouldn't be here. That's pure logic. So is there consciousness after death? There'd better be. There had better be, or Hitler gets away with murder. And Trump is the greatest human who's ever lived. And Netanyahu is doing the right thing. You know why? Because they're winning. Evil is winning. So evil is actually good. Is that what you think is true? Of course not. because you are also born moral. You do care about other human beings. You don't want to kill them, you want to love them. Watch yourself right here. Watch yourself very carefully. You don't want to hurt other human beings. You want to get along with them because you love them, because you can see that they're just like you. And whatever problem you have, they have. And so you love them because you love yourself. To the proportion that you have any regard for yourself as an entity, whatever you may think of that, that's how you regard others. So the old adage, which I've always hated, that you have to love yourself, that is not true, but you actually do love yourself whether you want to or not. But active love is not for yourself. Active love is for others. It's for others. Now you're in a super space where all of this was created. Created. So this is a designed situation, and you can tell just by looking around you. The cycles of the heaven make sense. They're logical, they're rational, they're physical. You can tell from the ecology that everything is balanced. A very, very powerful mind created this balance, this chemical balance, with 1 million species of animals and approximately 500,000 species of plants. Absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. Very delicate, very fragile. And now you can see your governments are destroying the earth. It's actually been done. The earth has been dealt a fatal blow, and there is no future for this planet. It'll take a couple of centuries or more before the planet finally expires. But in the meantime, humans are going to die of suffocation. It's going to go much faster than that because of the apocalypse and Armageddon. I know your fanny is starting to hurt, isn't it? And shove some unguent up your ass so your fanny doesn't hurt anymore. Because this is man stuff. This is for the big boys. And you're being invited to the highest level of humanity now. And I don't want to have to hold your hand while you try to waddle in with your fanny on fire. So imaginary space is the application of a qualifying term to the medium of light. Is it imaginary? No. So that's not what I mean by imaginary space. So then what do I mean? Drop to the second line. Infinity. Has infinity ever been defined? You know perfectly well that it has never been defined. Can it be defined? It is a contextual term because it's a qualifier. Infinite what? Infinity is not a isolated concept. It's a qualifier. It's an incomplete term. Infinite what? Infinite space. Let me rewrite that. Infinite. The reason I wrote infinity is because infinity has contexts. Infinite space. That's what we want. We always want space because it fills the universe. Even matter exists in space, doesn't it? Yes, if you examine the atom, and you may already know this, but this is worth repeating, if you actually were to construct a scale model of the atom, an atom is almost completely empty. But what about the electron? Does it take up space? We're going to get to that because whenever you talk about the electron, you're talking about two concepts, an extremely peculiar, baffling, paradoxical particle, if indeed it is a particle. There are 3 particles in the universe, and only 3. The standard model of particle physics is misnamed. It's the standard model of subparticle physics. And that's that particle soup that you may have seen, the eightfold way, where you have things like pouons and myons. Pardon me, I'm slightly dyslexic. Muons and pions, and pouons and myons. Because there's an antithesis to each one, which is considered to come in and out of imaginary space. And that's your first contact with imaginary space. It was Paul Dirac who predicted the existence of the anti-electron. But the anti-electron can annihilate an electron. That violates force conservation. So what actually happens? Nobody knows. So all of that happens in imaginary space. So that's your first contact with imaginary space. But that's not the most familiar context. That's as you go in towards the center of things, and the electron is definitely one of the center of things, as is the photon, as is the proton. Those make three different centers, and they make three different kinds of centers. And that's absolutely baffling. That makes very little sense. You can't say no sense, because everything is superpositional, which is a principle that Paul Dirac wrote a whole book on. Superposition simply means the layer of yes and no. It's the layer of the cat is dead and the cat is alive at the same tempuscule, which is an indivisible point of time. You're going to come to learn that term because that's a Boshkovician term. So imaginary space refers to at least two things, and get used to duality. If what you're saying doesn't refer to two things, you probably have it wrong. Everything in the universe, from our perspective, divides into two things. That has to do with superposition, and that has to do with imaginarity, and now for the key term, infinity. Infinity what? There's infinite time. There's a concept for infinite time, bipolar. Infinite time backwards, infinite time forwards. What about infinite time through space? That's called space-time. That's when you freeze frame the universe at one tempuscule and analyze it, in which case time is frozen, which drives men literally out of their minds, which is why your physicists are psychotic. They're definitely psychotic. They're exploring the definition and the depths of psychosis. They can't get out. They can't answer the questions that have to be answered. And so they just go sideways. They go everywhere. You think about space-time and the space-time cone diagram, that represents the consciousness of science. It means they're gone. They're goners. They'll never get out. They'll never get the answers that science seeks. So they're fakes. But they get paid mightily. They get about $1 trillion a year from the United States government, which is not human. Okay? We're getting there. I know. You're fanny again. Get some unguent. Get a suppository. Get one of those, and just so it doesn't itch anymore. Because I don't have time for crybabies, okay? Or if you're retarded, I'm sorry. But you're gonna have to realize that you have to change to my level. I do not need to adjust to you. I don't have time. So infinite space. What does that mean? Every child knows. Now we can't actually solve it, but this is the nature of how we contact infinity. When you look into the night sky. And you've done it, so let's do it once more. Where's the edge? Where's the edge? Okay, we have a geometric concept. I discovered the edge. The universe is finite. Has the James Webb Telescope discovered it? No, and it never will. They're looking for the edge of the Big Bang. They're psychotic. They think that the universe exploded out of an impossibly small dot called a singularity. They need to be locked up. They need to have their arms folded inside of a canvas coat. They need to be hung upside down from their feet in a rubber room where they're just fed intravenously if you want to keep them alive. They actually all should be mercifully shot. I mean, intellectually, we need to get rid of our scientists. They're corrupt. Well, so's your government. So's your religion. Am I right or am I wrong? You listen up because I know the answer. You don't. That's why you're tuned in. So this goes all the way. All the way. So let's start. We have space and we have time. And the current model in physics is space-time, as you know. That is worshipped, by the way. That is worshipped. And don't you doubt my word, it is worshipped in the place of God himself. So space-time is at the apex of what humanity thinks it knows. Is it all of humanity? No. It's just a tiny percentage of 15% of humanity. The 15% that is European, that is white. 15% of humanity made all the technology and made all the advancements in science, so-called, which really is technology, which makes our world. Your cell phone, your car, the jets, the rockets, everything. Everything is from the white race. Why is that important? Because that's not humanity. And the white race does not speak for humanity. It never has, and it never will. Whatever is the solution that humans want, it is not the European solution. It will not come from America. It's too small, it's too limited, and now it's corrupt. And it always was corrupt. Technology is satanic, and that actually refers to Satan as an entity. The governments you can encapsulate as concepts, where when you say they're satanic, you mean that's a quality. But when you're talking about technology, you're talking about hands-on manipulation of either an angel or a spirit, or if you don't like those terms because your fanny hurts or itches, then you can say extraterrestrial or alien. And those are in imaginary space. Do they exist in physical space? Yes. But you'll never see them. So do they exist? Yes. They exist in imaginary space. Well, how can you prove that? You can't until you listen to me, and then you'll be able to prove it absolutely. That's called understanding. The takeaway as a class name, what it is that you want from understanding. Because understanding, why? Why do you need to understand anything? Well, it will help guide you through life. Guide you? Yeah, well, what understanding for is wisdom, which is a term that no American or actually no white person can possibly understand, again, until you listen to me. Because I can define what wisdom is so that you know what it is, so that you can have it. You can't have what you don't even know how to define. All right, that's science. So I hope you're waking up. You might achieve a new level of enlightenment at any moment when you listen to me. All right. So infinite space is outer spatial infinity, which is not linear, it's spheric. Okay, that's obvious. So the universe is spherical from our perspective on Earth with point consciousness vision. So it goes equally in all directions. That's called sphericity. So already Euclid is way back in the Bronze Age. We do not need or want Euclid ever again. You have to drag him along. And that is the first theorem that I proved 4 years ago to begin this discovery sequence, which has gone off the chart in all directions over a period of 4 years, during which time I discovered the work of Boschkovich. So now I'm able to penetrate everything that Bohm wanted to know, and he's in the list, and everything, we'll get there. So what we have is infinite space going out. What about going in? Out is one direction. In is going in the other direction. So if you go out, you reach infinite space. How do you define that? You can't. What is the qualifying term for a space that you can tell exists, but you can't define it? It's imaginary. So that's imaginary, outer, spheric, spatial, infinity. Imaginary, outer, spheric, spatial, infinity. That is a 5-word compound term. Master it now, because it has a conjugate going in. Inner spatial, right? There's outer spatial. It's spherically oriented, so this is a spheric geometry. And at the outer edge is something that can't be defined, not even as an edge. And therefore your space is non-geometric. It's inconceivable. It has an imaginary component at the outer surface. It's not a surface. We don't have a word for it. Yes, it is a surface. I discovered it. And it can be seen with mathematics. It can be seen with mathematics. And this is the justification for all the worship of numbers and mathematics by satanically possessed white scientists. I hope you understand that this all makes sense. And I hope your fanny is feeling a lot better, okay? I really do. Because I can't afford a fucking retard dragging on me. So we have infinite space going out, which we call imaginary spheric infinity. But it's important to understand that that's referring to space, and only space has an imaginary edge. Okay, what about going in? What would it mean to go in? Well, just go in. You're at the edge, well, go back. So do what the Big Bang fuckers do. Just pull it back. You can do this mathematically. You went out, well, just reverse. So go in. Where does that stop? Answer that question now. As you go out, you reach an imaginary edge, correct? Yes, we just proved it. Well, it's hypostatic. We're saying so. It makes sense. That is, in fact, true. Now you come back. You come back to what? You come back to what we call the origin in geometry. Where was that? Where did you leave from? How do you know that there's an edge? Because if there's a spheric edge, there's a spheric center. Where was it? Where did you start from? You might be tempted to say 0. That's superpositionally correct if you're using linear logic, which we do physiologically. So there's a lot to be forgiven here if you get it wrong, which we all do. So is it 0? I proved that it's not. But that's in context of superposition, because you can see in the blackboard in your mind, which is now a 2-proportion blackboard. It's not 3D, it's 2-proportion. Going out is one dimension, well, it's one direction in a non-linear universe, and going in is the other direction. It's not left and right, it's not forwards and backwards, and it's not up and down. Those are polaric orientations in systematic linear space. But in the actual universe, there's no such thing as those two directions. There's no polarity. There's always conjugality. Look at it again. We look out as children to see the edge of space, and we realize we could be in Australia looking in the opposite direction. It's not the opposite direction. Anywhere that you look out from the surface of the Earth is equivalent on an integral. And that brings in the calculus, which I solved. Nobody knows what the calculus actually is except I do. And the same thing is true of complex numbers. We'll get to that. All of this is synthetic. It sounds outlandish. Because how could one little man with no credentials have discovered all these things, each of which sounds preposterous and pretentious? Because that's the way things are. And if you don't like it, get the fuck lost. So now, to answer our question, when you go out, you reach an imaginary edge. Well, pull back. Where's your origin? I will prove to you that you reach a conjugal imaginary edge going back. And you can't get to 0 because that's not a number. 0 represents nullity, it represents absence, it represents psychosis. There's no such thing as nullity in the universe, obviously, or there would be no universe. If there actually were such a thing as physical 0, it would be a hyper black hole, and there would be no universe. So that is the antithesis of physical reality, is the number 0. Therefore, the number 0 does not exist. But every time you take a linear distance to a star, you start at 0, because it's on a line. And a line does have 0 at its Archimedean balance point. And I discovered that. So I discovered a shitload of things at every single level, including the ultimate sub-fundamental level, which your physicists are too stupid. They're retarded. And part of it is because they're immoral, because they're money-hungry, prideful, sinful bastards. Okay? They serve the government, so what does that tell you? All right. So when you go out, you reach an imaginary edge. Well, according to my discovery, which you will now accept, which I will prove, when you draw back in to get back to the origin, so you have completion, you reach a conjugal imaginary edge. Have we discovered that? Yes, we have, but we can't define it yet. I define it. I can define it right now. when you go out, what are you doing? Well, first of all, you're defying gravity, right? That's the anti-gravitational direction from the center of the Earth. But are you going out from the center of the Earth? You could say so if you transfer the origin to the center of the Earth. But when you do it, it's from the center of your consciousness, which is offset from the center of the Earth. And that drives us mad because it leads to a schizoid split. Because now you don't know where the center is. And that's what we're taught in school, that everywhere in the universe is the center of the universe. Is that true? It's superpositional. If you say it is true, you're going to split your mind one way and lose your mind. But if you say no, you're going to split your mind in a conjugal direction and you're still insane. What I learned how to do, according to the actual principle of conjugal superposition, which is the solution of a paradox with an anti-paradox, what you do is you see both at once. And that's the equivalent of binocular vision, where you start to use both eyes instead of one. I hope that triggers an incredible mnemonic sequence in your mind, so you start to get the truth synthesis. This is going to involve you and your memory bank. Because the objective is to restructure what you already know so it makes sense. Isn't that right? That's what we're doing. Well, it happens in transit. All right, so now we have a framework for the universe where it has two edges, the center and the edge. The edge is at both edges, and the center, you could say, is at... Well, the center is different, isn't it? Yeah, it's incredibly tiny. How incredibly? It goes to the Planck limit, the Planck limit, where the Heisenberg principle takes over because you can't measure energy, which is momentum. You can't measure momentum and position. What you get is a probabilism, and that's unacceptable. Einstein nailed that one, but he died frustrated because he couldn't get the answer either. How do you square relativity with quantum entanglement? That has to be solved. That solves both at once if you can get them at the same time. Those are the two conjugal paradoxes. So now we're just going to breeze through this because we're coming up in an hour, and I won't go over an hour. First of all, because I'm so intense, and I have to monitor myself, because I am over 70 years old, and it is the hot season, okay? So I am finite, and I'm mortal, so I have to be cautious. But that's not the main reason. I actually never think about that. But I want you to think about it on my behalf, because it does enter in. I could drop dead at any second. But it's for your sake, because you've been dumbed down. You don't have a very good attention span, and it's not entirely your fault. When I say it's not entirely your fault, I should say it's not your fault. It's not your fault until you realize you can fix it. You're fixing it now by listening to me. You have to come up to a new level when you're listening to a guide, which is what I am, which gets to religion. Is your fanny starting to itch again? Just remember, you have two little hind deer legs that you can just bound away like a frightened rabbit any time you like. But I can't stop for you. All right. So space is bounded at two spheric limits. Got that? How does time figure in? That is an extraordinary question that nobody has been able to answer until I did. So I'm going to give you an extremely encapsulated, extremely fast answer to the question of how did Einstein give space the quality of time? Because space has no qualities. Space has no characteristics. This is what led Newton to he did not make any comments on spooky action at a distance. He didn't like his formulation of gravity because physically he could already tell that it violates relativity because it's spooky action at a distance. Obviously, just like magnetism, nobody can explain why two magnets affect each other through empty space. There's never been an answer for that. Well, when you... Don't forget that has to do with electromagnetism, and all we're talking about is magnetism. Gravity is magnetism. It's integral magnetism. It's protonic magnetism. That's why it pulls in. Well, the problem with that is what pushes out. Nobody's ever discovered the nurture force balance to gravity. Gravity is monopolar. It pulls in, but it doesn't. There's no equal and opposite reaction, which is why the physicists argue over whether it's a force. When they say force, it depends on if you mean Newtonian force, which is energy applied force. But there's such a thing as intrinsic motion in the universe. It's what keeps the universe running. That's not Newtonian force. That's angular momentum. And that's where you get into space-time and the speed of light, which, of course, I have solved, as always. But now we go to time. How did Albert manage to give space a characteristic which he called time? I'm sure you know this, and if you don't, you shouldn't really be doing physics at all, although I hope you listen, because you actually could get everything that would ordinarily take you 4 to 16 years to master. I can teach you in under 10 minutes. If you're awake and aware and you apply yourself, you'll get this. So what is the actual formulation? Geometrically, mathematically, it's a 4-component number system for hyperspace. But the 4th component is imaginary. It comes back to imagine. It's called that. It's imaginary space. But it's not space, it's time. So in the Einstein field equation, if you go to program it in Python or C++ or any other language, the first thing you do is get 4 numbers. And the 3 numbers are for 3D space. That's an error, because you begin with a linear basis when you're not talking about a linear phenomenon. So there's going to be a shitload of calculus. And in fact, it's hypercalculus, which no man can do. Only a supercomputer can solve the Einstein field equation for geopositioning or astrogation. So that's a hell of a lot of information. I hope you're getting excited. We're coming up on an hour. We only have 10 minutes to wrap up this entire sequence. So I'm just going to breeze through it. The Einstein field equation for space-time, which is the definition of relativity, is a 4-component system which uses 3 linear components. That's going to make a 3-1 split. What you want is a 2-2 split. That's what I discovered. But you need a conjugal number system for that. I discovered that. That makes a new geometry, which I discovered. It's the spheric geometry. So I discovered all of this that gives us the basis for reformulating spacetime. But it's not time. It's not time. Why not? It's because time is a derivative. Time is a derivative of energy. Time has nothing to do with space. It's a derivative of energy. And so what Einstein actually discovered is the conjugation of space with energy. But he didn't say that, and nobody ever has, because they don't have the geometric and mathematical basis to say it. But time is a derivative of energy. So what is energy? It's angular momentum, right? An electron spins. That's pure energy. A photon, you could say that it spins out, but it spins out uniformly in a spheric direction called a spheric wavefront, but it's still angular momentum. It never loses its angular momentum, which is why at the collapse of the wave function, it becomes a particle. The Jays just arrived, and they're going to squawk their little brains out. I'm going to put this on pause. I do apologize. It appears that the Jays have relented. If they spot a hawk, they'll just keep squawking for over an hour. It's been happening over the past few days because the hawks are out. This is the height of the heat season, and we hear the hawks. Beautiful sound. You may hear some more Jay sounds in the background. The door is closed, though. So if you do hear it, it is subdued compared to if the door were open. All right. So that's what Einstein discovered, but he used linear systematic space, which just destroys his solution unless you have supercomputers, in which case Satan can use the answer. So the reason Einstein is worshipped is because he serves Satan. Now, he didn't know that, so don't go, "Oh God, he said that Einstein is a Satan worshiper." No, that's not what I said. I said that Einstein is a genius who got an illegitimate solution because he believed in Euclid, because he had no choice, because he didn't know how to think straight. Actually, he didn't know how to think curved. Well, I do. So I'm better than Einstein. Get used to that. So now we have the conjugation of space with energy, which is correct. That's actually the basis of everything we're going to be talking about from this point forward. Pardon the pun on point. So now we go to the next line down, energy. What is it? Well, energy is motion, and that is correct. So just accept that, because I can't pause now. We only have 7 minutes left. So energy is cyclic motion. It's closed motion. It's actually what makes the universe, is this closed motion. So the actual reformulation of what today is called the Big Bang, that would be the origin of the universe. You can't do that. We're too finite to know the origin of the universe. That will never be discovered. But what can be formulated much more consciously, that is much more rationally, is how is the universe originally constituted? What is the absolute basis of reality, physical reality? It's the injection of energy from a superspace. And that's God. God and superspace are not necessarily identical. It can be proved that they're not identical. And that has to do with idealism, which we're getting to, which is a framework that replaces materialism. So you no longer have to deal with point sources, which is what I discovered, is that you can't deal with point sources except in one unique case called the proton. The proton makes a point in space. Nothing else does. Only a proton is a spatial object. And the proton is extremely peculiar that way. And in fact, as I'll be showing you, since all protons in the universe can be proved to be alike, they don't change energy state, they don't change at all. Except they do change between neutronic state and charge state. So the proton and the neutron are the same particle, but they flicker. And they much prefer to flicker from one way rather than the other. In other words, a neutron can change to a proton virtually spontaneously. This is the source of the pseudo force called the weak force, which is illusory. The particle physicists are psychotic. However, there is such a thing as a flicker between neutronic and protonic state. So that's the definition of a proton. The neutron is relatively insignificant. Of course, nothing is insignificant in this universe. But that's actually the cutting edge of where I'm at, where I haven't quite penetrated the exact explanation for the neutronic state. But it is the basis of fission energy. So it's extremely important to Satan, because that's what destroyed tens of thousands of lives with a fireball, both over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was Satan having an orgasm. And that's your United States government. So that's what you vote for. I hope you're happy with your fucking president, whatever. That's up to you to wake up to that. I can't help you there. Ooh, dear. Now, so we have energy, which is defined on angular momentum, which is on a closed line, not a Euclidean line. All makes sense, right? So that refers to a fundamental notion of cyclicism. When you have a closed circle, which is an electron, which is a closed sphere, it's a surface rather than anything else. So whatever an electron is, it's not exactly a position, but it has a locality. That's because it's a pure surface in space. So it actually transcends space, because what it is something in space that is not space. And that's also true of the proton, and therefore those are the only two particles, but only the proton is a spatial particle. The electron is a transcendental particle. The proton also partakes of this transcendentality because as it bends space, as we can visualize, it's not actually bending space. It's exuding a force field that changes the characteristic of space for an electron or another proton. So the protons and electrons are extremely intimately related. And I can show that those emerge from what's called the explosion of an SMBH. So I have all the solutions in astrophysics as well. I can tell you how spiral galaxies form. Your astrophysicists cannot. I can tell you how all galaxies form, and I'm working on the theory of how galaxy clusters form, but that's the current cutting edge of my research. I'm way ahead of the physicists in all categories. So to continue, we come to a very important concept, which goes to the answer to my listener's question. What's the application of all this in my life for anybody? It begins with the Bohmian implicate order. And if you haven't read anything by Bohm, I can tell you this, you don't need to read a lot, because he really only said one thing clearly. That has footnotes. I have studied Bohm intently. Bohm is one of my gurus. But you see, he went outside of science, because he's one of the only men, I think he's the only man, who actually got a practical solution out of quantum mechanics. But it took him out of science. And the reason it took him out of science is that he penetrated the inner order. In other words, just as I have penetrated outer space to get a finite universe that now rationalizes the universe in every way, Bohm went in and he penetrated the inner surface. And that goes to loopy land. Well, both do. But if you conjugate them, they explain each other. And that is extraordinarily profound, what I just said. So that leads to the concept of emergence. Because what is the implicate order? It's the this goes to what the I Ching talks about, is the heavenly principle. How does heaven, which is superspace for actual space, what we know is in a superspace, which we call heaven, or just all this stuff that's above. It's infinitely big around us, infinitely big from our perspective. It's not actually infinite, but for all practical purposes, we'll never understand that. It's too big. We're so tiny, so immensely tiny. Well, what Bohm discovered is when you look through the other end of the telescope. Because in the infinitely tiny, what can be proved from quantum mechanics, Bohm discovered this, and the Dalai Lama gave the official seal of heaven to Bohm, who is Bohm's personal friend. They talked a lot. The Dalai Lama and Bohm were intimate friends. How many other scientists can say that? And why did the Dalai Lama make a dedication to a book written about Bohm after Bohm died? Bohm died a little bit prematurely, for a great loss, a tremendous loss. But whatever. Bohm had discovered that the way the divine force, that is the heavenly principle of the I Ching, executes its will in physical space, including human space. How does that happen? It happens from the inside out. So that's called emergence, and that's quite an overworked term, but essentially Bohm discovered that the universe works itself out from an inner principle, and I can complete that statement. The universe works its will outward from an inner surface to the proportion that is contained by an outer surface. So it's all rational. None of this is irrational. God is perfectly rational. There is no irrationality in supernaturality. Let's keep going. We're over an hour. I'm sorry we're over an hour. I have to stop. For your sake, as well as mine. Even though the J's just stopped. We're halfway through. We'll have another hour lecture later today. I hope you tune in. This will change your life, or you're simply not listening. I've been doing this long enough to know if I'm doing it right. Yes, I am. So if you're not getting this, you're probably not ready for it. That's the best I can say. I think that you should be ready for it, but I can't control you that way. You can't force love. You can't force fun, and you can't force understanding. If you resist, it's because you need to fix yourself. And I can't help you there. But Al-Ghazali can. But you probably wouldn't be able to hear that either. I don't know where you're at. You see, I have to reach everybody, and that's the whole spectrum. But I am attempting to target a certain demographic or a certain stratum of men who are reasonably intelligent. And they do have a certain innate faith that things will turn out to be rational and meaningful, and that your life can be fulfilled. But very few men are actually like that, as I'm sure you're aware. So examine yourself. Is there anything about you that you need to fix? Because only you can, you see. Only you can fix yourself. I'm trying to give you choices, but if you're incapable of choice, it simply won't help. That's the most I can give you in the way of a sermon or a psychoanalysis. So thank you. I do have to desist now. Keep looking up. We'll be right back.